It looks like it's recording.
Yes.
Recording has started. I guess that's a good sign. Well, anyway, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our second and final webinar on hospital site in Pineville. What I'd like to do is share the screen. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So this is our second and final webinar on the feasibility analysis for the hospital site. We're going to do introductions in a second, but basically we're going to focus on funding strategies and sort of a high-level estimate of the costs based on what we know about the site. Talk about some pre-development tasks which are really critical in moving forward, and some next steps. I think we're trying to package not only the funding strategy, but also the steps that really get us there. So just to start with introductions, I guess we'll start with the town. Doug.
Let's see. Hang on. I'm trying to unmute.
You are unmuted.
Oh, I am unmuted. Well, there you go. I'm Doug Gann, Chief of Staff to Mayor Dupree in the city of Pineville, our director of our town development district as well. And so approach it from the city side and our downtown development district that the property sits right in the middle of.
Terrific. Emily.
Can everyone hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Jimenez with EPA here in Region 6 out of Dallas, Texas. And I'm also the land revitalization coordinator here in the region.
Fantastic. And we have Andrew.
Hi, yes. Good morning, everyone. I am Andrew Portland. I am a new project officer with the EPA here in Region 6, and I am also Emily's alternative. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Rebecca.
Hey, this is Rebecca with LDEQ. I'm the Brownfield Coordinator for the state of Louisiana.
And her colleague, Jennifer.
Hey, hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Jennifer Schatzel. I work with Rebecca in the Brownfields program at DEQ. I'm more the technical liaison on the technical side.
Okay. Do we have Sherry from Tetra Tech? I can't see the screen.
No, she's not on, Dale.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Anybody else from EPA? I just emailed Ann. She might be a couple minutes late. I think we're good. And Sam may be joining us as well. And again, we're recording this, so anybody misses, they'll be able to see it. All right, Vita Nova team. We'll start with the boss, Mike Taylor.
Hey, everybody. Great project. Excited to be able to present this to you. Obviously, there's much more work to be done, but happy to be a part of it and bring the team to see if we can move the ball forward.
And here comes Ann Carroll. Hold on a second. Good morning, Ann. All right, let's let Ann get booted up here. Juliet.
Good morning, everyone. Juliet Brodelsky with Vita Nova, and you'll be hearing from me later about our research and some of our thoughts on the Central Louisiana State Hospital site and what we think you might need to do to move the site from the pre-development stage into the development stage. So looking forward to having the discussion today. So thanks for joining us.
Tim.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. This is Tim Hubbard. I'm with Vita Nova. I'm based in Frankfort, Kentucky. It's been a pleasure working on this project. It's a great project, Pineville Hospital. I helped out with doing the interviews, got to talk with so many great folks. collected a lot of good information and look forward to presenting that to you today. Thank you.
Lee.
Lee Ferguson here. I'm a newcomer to the Vita Nova team. Worked for a number of years in New Orleans on the economic development for the downtown development district there, and most of my background has been in the private sector development business. And I'm excited to have an opportunity to work on this project. I think it's got a lot of opportunity there.
Thanks, Lee. And I'm Dale Coop. I've been the sort of coordinator and project manager for this. Ann, are you there, Ann Carroll?
She said, is there a number I can call in for audio? I'll email that to you, Ann, so that you can dial in and talk. She said she's having audio issues, so I'll get that to her, Dale.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so I think we got everybody who's on the call. If anybody shows up, just let me know because I'm looking at the slides more than the screen. And today I'm going to turn it over to Tim in a minute, but today you're going to be hearing about funding, certainly, but you're going to be hearing about partnerships and sort of multi-level financial commitments. It's all part of like a strategy that we're going to share with you and see where it goes from there. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Tim to sort of give an outline of a few slides on how we got to where we are.
Thank you, Dale. As everyone knows, our scope on this project included providing technical assistance to LDEQ to further assess the feasibility of redevelopment of the former Central Louisiana State Hospital. During our first webinar back in January, we summarized our findings for the first two tasks. For task one, we conducted background research on site conditions that could impact future development. And as part of that work, we obtained and reviewed a number of reports, maps, and other documents regarding the hospital property, and we analyzed opportunities and constraints for the hospital redevelopment. For task two, the stakeholder interview portion, we conducted interviews with 11 stakeholder groups representing both local and state public agencies, economic development entities, and the private sector. For today's webinar, we're going to focus on task three, where we'll be presenting high-level funding strategies to fund or finance the site improvements that were found in the ICF conceptual site reuse plan. Next slide, Dale.
Yeah, and I would just add to what Tim's saying is that all of the stakeholder interviews, all the real details of it will be in the final submission. Everybody will have a copy of all the details, and there are details.
Yeah, we've got some pretty good notes and really got a lot of good information from folks. I can't really say enough how cooperative and open everyone was in that process. So thank you very much. That really helped us out. Again, for the task three that we'll be talking about today, we'll be discussing funding strategies, which include public or private cost sharing agreements, payment in lieu of taxes, tax increment financing or TIFs, or incremental revenue models, development impact fees. We'll also talk about the use of the request for proposals, RFPs, which the city has done for a few of the parcels already. I know the Why Not Stop is the first one that's already developed, and there's a couple of others that are in the works as well along the corridor, commercial corridor. And we'll talk about master development agreements as well, tax deferral abatement program options, state or federal grants, which there are a lot of those, both state and federal grants for funding. And lastly, historic or other tax credit programs, which many of those are earmarked for historic properties that can be salvaged and restored. And we do have a number of historic properties on the property, Dairy Barn, Road Cottage, and a few others. Next slide. This is the ICF conceptual development plan. We thought it'd be important to kind of break it out into some components. The main components include 202 acres for master planned mixed use development. And it also sets aside an additional almost 200 acres of the property dedicated to open space, green space, and walking trails. The plan includes a new internal roadway system on a little over 17 acres of land. And it also includes new construction of 384 multifamily dwelling units, 124 single-family dwelling units, 69 two-family dwelling units, and a little over 18 acres of a mix of commercial, office space, and retail. Next slide. The ICF plan calls for phasing of the build out, the development broken into 8 phases. Phase 1 is a single family home development, which is close to town. Phase 2 includes a multifamily apartment development to provide additional quality rental housing and to support the village center. From the previous marketing data, Pineville seems to have a need for multifamily housing options, so this would help meet that need to build out that multifamily apartments. Phase 3 of the development includes highway-oriented commercial development and the senior living corporate headquarters site that's envisioned along Highway 16571. This can occur as the developer is determined through a number of different processes. The Why Not Stop, excuse me, as we mentioned, has already been developed in the commercial corridor, and then there are 2 other parcels, a 20-acre and 11-acre parcel that's planned for development under the RFP process there. Phase 4 of the plan includes developing office and commercial sites adjacent to the village center. And then in phase 5, the village center is to be developed when there's enough market demand for mixed use retail uses. So that will not happen immediately. That will take place over time to build that momentum and market demand. And then finally, development phases 6 through 8 include constructing additional residential parcels ranging from townhomes and single family homes to apartments. Next slide. And I know we've talked about these things in the previous webinar we discussed, but we thought it was good to have an overview of some of the key takeaways from our research and interviews. The site includes 409 acres of land with 116 buildings and other structures totaling over 817,000 square feet. So there's a lot of buildings out there for sure. Of those 116 buildings, approximately 18 are currently in use by the Department of Health, and most buildings on site are identified for demolition and will require asbestos and lead paint abatement. There are environmental conditions present throughout the site. We did find out through the phase 1s that there were 24 underground storage tanks that were used for, these tanks were used for backup emergency generators or gasoline, fairly small. I think these were 50-gallon tanks, but those will require removal and proper closure and potentially some soil cleanup associated with those, and a few other locations across the site too. I think there were some drums and some solid waste and some debris left over. So those are areas that will have to be addressed too. There are historic structures, potential archaeological sites present, along with the unmarked graves as part of the old cemetery. Cemetery has been surveyed, but I think there are some of those graves, some graves that may fall outside of some of the surveyed boundaries. So any construction that takes place will have to take that into account. As part of those historic structures, we've discussed the Rose Cottage and the Dairy Barn have been entered into the National Historic Register for Historic Buildings. So that will make them eligible for some funding there. And there could be some other buildings on the property that may be eligible for historic designation. So that would be helpful. The state owns the on-site infrastructure and utilities, and all of the infrastructure does require significant upgrades. The roads are not constructed to current public standards. They're not, the width and curbing is not up to what the standards are now, so those will have to be modified. Water and wastewater systems have not been upgraded in the last 30 years, so that will have to be addressed as well as the electric and gas. Portions of the site are located in 100-year, 500-year FEMA designated floodplains. So this could impact development in some portions of the property. And last, the site conditions suggest that the pre-development costs, which are the infrastructure cost and the other things that we've talked about, are high. Now, we put together a high-level estimate of $68 million. Again, that includes a contingency. I realize that is a large number when you look at it, but it is, of course, a very large property. And as we mentioned, a large number of buildings out there that will have to be demoed and addressed, as well as the infrastructure that will have to go in. The actual number for the pre-development could be lower. It could be a little bit higher. That's something that could be more closely identified later on as more information comes to light. Juliet and Dale will be going into a more detailed breakdown of those pre-development costs and funding. Obviously, with a cost this high, the key takeaways are that it is unlikely that a private developer would take on these costs alone, and significant public support will likely be required to advance the site redevelopment. So those are the key takeaways there.
Well, I think that gets to the point after we all pick ourselves up off the floor at 68 million or whatever it's going to be, that we have to do a lot more investigation of this, but also it makes the case about collaboration and really planning in the future. So I'm going to turn it over to Juliet to take the next bunch of slides and go through a process that we think will be a good process to follow. And, you know, obviously you'll do it within the confines of your city hall and the region. So I'll turn it over to Juliet.
Okay, so the next few slides, we're going to be talking about, you know, that big number a little bit and how we got there. That's $68 million. And, you know, please understand that this is, you know, our effort to assist you as you look at the site and you try to undertake some strategies to take it from where it is now to take it to where you want it to be, which is the village center, the high, you know, the high level, you know, residential and commercial development that's really copacetic with your goals and your vision and your idea that this can really be something special for your community. So how do we get from where it is now to what your vision is? And that's what we're really talking about. That $68 million. Is it, again, it's a big number. That doesn't include development costs. So that's really just what do you need to do to prepare the site for development. So in our analysis, you know, I know you've done some development out on the highway and that's been continuing, but we're really looking at the site in its totality. So from our perspective, you know, having worked with brownfield redevelopment with developers, you know, working on very challenging sites, you know, some more challenging than this one, that we feel that this is, you know, the site, the interior of the site is really what we call the pre-development stage. So you don't have a developer, you have an owner, it's in public ownership, but there's a lot of unknowns in that pre-development stage. You know, you have a big site, but they haven't necessarily been divided up. You don't know what all your costs are. So again, this was our effort to try to assist you to understand what the magnitude of the cost might be in that pre-development stage. Again, and not a final cost, but let's talk about then what's in that cost. Dale, if you want to, and you'll see that slide a couple times. So so in the pre-development stage, you know, and this is very typical for, you know, for any kind of brownfield site. In the pre-development stage, a developer is going to look at, and again, we assume that this site will be developed ultimately by a private developer. Dale, just go back one, please. Dale.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Thanks. Okay, so a developer will, I mean, in your ICF plan, there's a lot of different development types. So ultimately your developer is, or developers will come in and say, okay, I want to, this should be residential, this should be office, I'm looking at retail, I'm looking at mixed use. How am I going to subdivide the property? It's a big, you know, it's 400 acres. You've only, you know, kind of chopped off, you know, 10 or 20 acres. So, you know, they're still dealing with a lot of real estate. They're going to look at how do I subdivide it? How do I phase it? And is it feasible? You know, how much is it going to cost me to prepare the site? How much is it going to cost me to build the site? You know, what is the return on my investment? You know, what are the regulations? Is this zoned? You know, can I do it? Do I need permits from, you know, different agencies? And then on top of all that is the environmental, you know, that we know is there based on the, you know, the historic site uses, you know, the underground storage tanks and the buildings and the asbestos and the lead. Again, not atypical from a large, any other large brownfield site or a redevelopment site. So this is the pre-development stage. You're really going to want to assess what is really going on in all those areas. You know, what is the development? What is it going to do? What's in the ground? You know, is my development feasible? So while it's in public ownership, a lot of this pre-development planning can be done to address those questions. The state owns the property. You want to get to a private developer, but what can the public sector do now while it's in the pre-development stage? And you're really, to be undertaking this project now is really the right place you want to be, because I know this, you have a lot of questions about, do we have enough money for the roads? And, can we get enough? Is there enough return? Well, you're asking all the right questions. So how do you go about, moving through that process to address those? We call them data gaps, but they're really questions. What is the site, what is the potential and how much is it going to cost us to get there? And so that's really what we're focused on in this pre-development stage. So next slide, Dale. So, I kind of broke this up to, this is there's a lot of words, we're going to have this in a report. So you and the mayor and the other folks that have been participating from the state can be able to review this. But, there's like two ways to look at this. There's like, what can we do? But then there's also, why are we doing it? So there's a benefit to the future development if you do these planning activities. So if you can, finalize when, the state facilities will be relocated from the site, that's going to help a future developer, because they're going to be able to say, okay, I know that I can get in the ground and start my development in, this year. So there's been some uncertainty, I think, with the state, saying, well, the facilities are moving out by 2022. No, the State Department of Public Health they're moving out by 2023. So if the state can really finalize that relocation plan and get all the buildings, vacated, that's going to really help your overall development timeline. A developer will be less likely to be interested in the site if they don't know that they're going to be able to have site access. So that's an important planning activity, again, that the public sector can undertake. Second of all the environmental issues. I know the state is working very hard. Go back, Dale. That wrong slide. Just go back one. Thanks. The state has money to do environmental site assessments and cleanup plans. I mean, that's exactly what you want to be doing. You want to be looking at clarifying, addressing all the data gaps, getting all the cost assessments that related to the environmental. The developer is going to be again, less likely to want to take on risk. So as much as you can do now in this pre-development stage to clarify what are the environmental conditions, what needs to happen for cleanup, how much is it going to cost for the entire site, not just, site by site, but really looking at the site as a potential, how do you get from, where it is now to the developer? You're going to have to look at the whole site. That's tied into the cost estimates. So it's not just, okay, here's what we've identified, but actually how much is it going to cost to clean up those underground storage tanks, the asbestos, the demolition? Do some of the sites need to be preserved? The buildings, are they in good enough shape? They're actually can be preserved and not demolished. So those are data gaps that we're seeing that, you can address now. Same kind of assessment for the utilities. We've read through the files, and typically, again, in a redevelopment planning, you'll have an engineer come and evaluate the existing systems, the natural gas systems, the electricity hookups, the water and sewer capacities. Is there enough capacity to, support this new development, or does everything need to be reconstructed? We don't know. So those are things that you can do now. Again, and that's only going to help a future developer understand what are the true costs of this development going forward. Finally, in this pre-development activity, the planning and zoning, you're going from basically a state-owned facility, and it's one owner, to potentially multiple users, multiple uses, multiple owners. Have you evaluated your planning and zoning tools? Are they copacetic with what, again, the vision is for the site? What kind of permits may be required? The more you can clarify that now or change zoning or amend zoning if needed, again, that's just going to help the developer in the future have easier time to getting through the development approval process if you've kind of addressed that now. And now's a good time to do that. Additionally, in terms of these like real, kind of development planning activities, we've identified a number of things that are kind of optional, but also would help, future activities. So if you're looking at federal funding, if you're looking at state funding, if you're looking at, making the case for tax incentives or historic preservation tax credits that might help in future, you want to take a look at all these additional studies, as potential activities. National Environmental Policy Act reviews that might be in play if you look at federal funding, the NEPA checklist, if you're familiar with that, market studies that again look at, is the development really going to be successful? Can it be financed? Financing entities, grant agencies want to know, is this really feasible? Cost benefit analyses, very similar. You look at if there's going to be a specific investment for a road or a piece of infrastructure, is the return there? Are they going to get a positive, cost benefit for those investments? So those are things that you can be doing now. In addition, if you're looking at, trying to preserve some open space, have you thought about what does that open space look like? Is it a trail system? Is a public open space that's really part of a private development, or is it really open to the public? Those are some of the things that, again, you can start to plan and really determine this is going to be the best for our community going forward. And those are some planning activities that you can do now. Again, if that's part of the vision. Next slide. In addition to the planning, we've identified some things that you can actually, start to do, the shovels in the ground type of activities. And these are a pre-development activity, but they're more like a pre-development implementation activity. So again, the benefit to developers it's just you're going to try to get away, you're going to take away those barriers to ultimately developing the site. So again, if you relocate the activities, the Department of Public Health activities, they're off-site, you can start working on the buildings. If you start, abating the buildings, they can start to be demolished. You can start to get to the underground storage tanks. If you want to, start to reduce the future development costs, you can start tackling, some of the infrastructure needs. Do the water lines need to be expanded? Do the gas lines need to be expanded? Do you need to, deconstruct those security gates coming in and out of the facility? Those are just some things. Again, we don't know what these tasks are, but if you start to think about it, the public, while it's in public ownership, you can start to tick some of these things off the list and make it easier ultimately for the developer to come in and then just do the development side of it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about then how you would fund this. So I'm not just trying to pile this, like the to-do list, this is why it's going to take $68 million, but there are ways to fund this. So it's not, you don't have to come up with new funding sources necessarily out of local funds. And then the legal or regulatory, we talked about all that. Do you want to implement any zoning changes, implement any regulatory changes that might be necessary? These are all things that you can do now as an implementation activity as well. So next slide, Dale. So how does this all come together? So we put together again, a very high level budget. Please, take it for what it is. It's just a very high level budget for planning purposes. But we tried to say, listen, you're going to have some, planning, maybe some visioning. You're going to have abatement, soil, underground storage tank removal and soil, potentially some road reconstruction, curbing, sidewalks, potentially some upgrades to the infrastructure, potentially some landscaping and public open space. You have an opportunity maybe to set up some new renewable energy systems on site. you know, you're always going to have design, engineering, permitting, inspection, and that. And then, you know, we put in a big contingency. So you can see, you know, how it totals. And please, you know, feel free to poke holes in it. But again, it's our best, you know, it's our best estimate to assist you on understanding the magnitude of these costs from the, you know, the state as the owner, the city as the facilitator, the development. How are we going to attack? How are we going to get this number down? So that's the
Yeah,
next
So
conversation. Yep.
Juliet,
Mhm.
just,
Mhm.
I think you should put in the caveat that within the context and the time frame that we had, this was something that needed to be done, but of course, further work could be done to better, you know, elucidate these costs, right?
Right. Exactly. So this is not an engineer's estimate. This is a planning level estimate. And planners do this all the time. And we're planners. So okay. So next slide. So then, you know, once you start getting through the development, you can start then really thinking about the deal. You know, who's going to come in? Who's your developer? How are they going to get it financed? You know, what are they bringing to the table? You know, that's the next step in this. You know, I said you were going to see the slide a couple times. So once you're moving out of pre-development, the deal management. So Dale, you can go to the next slide. So, you know, again, how are the public, what are the public entities doing to facilitate this development? So developer solicitation, you're already doing that. You're doing that for the out parcels. However, you know, if you're looking at the site and the totality, are you looking at a single site approach? Are you looking at a multi-site approach? Are you looking at somebody to come in and develop the whole master plan together? What is their, you know, what is the developer's funding plan? What are they bringing to the table? What are they willing to do on a pre-development side versus a development side? Are they willing to build the roads? If you know, help them you know, find funding for it, are they willing to do all the utilities on their own dime? So those are the kind of things that you're going to need to establish and clarify to really figure out then what does the deal look like? Because at this point, it's probably not going to be parcel by parcel. To really, you know, realize your vision, you're going to have to probably look at a multi-site approach or a master developer type approach. So, you know, Vita Nova does this, you know, all the time, you know, for clients. You know, we help them with this process. But these are just some of the ways that, you know, you can work through the process, you know, requesting letters of interest by a master developer, putting together an RFP that really seeks developers that meet your needs, you know, putting together that timeline. You know, once the state facilities are off site, you know, then you really have a timeline for development. You want to draft developer agreements. You want to know what the public entities are committing to the deal. And then, you know, you have to get the State Department of Lands on board because they're the owner. So what is their agreement? What do they need in return? So these are all part of the deal management steps, you know, again, once you're getting through the site prep. Next slide, please. I put this slide together just to show you an example, you know, like if you're, you know, in the deal management. So say, for example, you want to move forward with a public-private partnership for a, you know, another phase of the development. You know, you've got some grants that you know that you can contribute to the deal, and now you're ready to either, you know, issue a developer agreement or, you know, negotiate some kind of a contract. At this point, we have a lot of all the TBDs. There's a lot of holes, and you know, you couldn't really go and negotiate with a master developer because you don't know what the terms are. So this is kind of a template to say, okay, when you have these site questions and the costs, you know, figured out, you're really ready to start to, you know, solicit the next round of a developer. You know, who's going to commit complete the site remediation? What is it going to cost? When is it going to be completed? You know, what are the costs of the infrastructure improvements for that phase? Who's going to be completing them? What is it going to cost? Is the zoning in place? What financial incentives are needed? You know, what is the development? Is it a mixed use? Is it residential? You know, is there a energy component to it? And where's the private funding coming from? So, you know, again, you're not there yet. We don't see, but there, as you move through the process of the development, you can really start to fill in these holes, and you're ready to move to a bigger deal than just the outlying parcels. You can go to the next slide. And again, once you have the deal, then you're at the end of this stage. You're talking about redevelopment, development. You've got everything in place, and you can start to really get the development inside the site, in accordance with what your goals are. It's going to take some time, though. So, Dale, next slide. Again, once you're moving through this process, again, you're going to finalize what development is. You're going to secure your permits. You're going to commit. You're going to complete your environmental stuff. Public and private financing will be secured. Then once the site development, it's really more of a conventional approach because you've addressed all the hurdles to the development on this site. So one more slide, Dale. I think we'll just kind of a sum it up. So what we did was we took that budget again and we said, okay, is this a pre-development or a development task? And what are the potential funding sources? As we're going through this, and Dale's going to go through the funding sources, but we think that if you took that look at that $68 million budget, you may be able to leverage $30 to $40 million of it from public funding sources, public grants. And that's a big number. So if you could get that $68 million down to, 20, then you really can start to, work with developers and say, listen, we've leveraged all this money. What are you bringing to the table? And it starts to become a very attractive development site. So, there's public grants, there's public incentives, there's potentially opportunity for a special taxation district, and, tax credits for developments too. So, Dale's going to talk a little bit about then where all that money might be coming from. But this is where you can see, there's a lot of money out there for this type of activity right now, particularly for pre-development brownfield sites. So it's a would be a big undertaking, but it's very doable. It's very doable. So,
You know, before you go on, I was just thinking I didn't look at the market study that ICF did for the plan, but I think a piece that may be helpful to the town to get their head around all this money is what's the economic impact of this development for the town, which may also help in developing funding. So sort of a feasibility and then, secondary and tertiary impacts of having all these folks who are going to spend money in their town, right? So I think that might be something to add to the list that may help in attracting funding.
mm-hmm. Yeah. So
Again, I didn't see what ICF did, but I'm guessing that that's something that
yeah, so that's one of the these are all this is a summary of all the all the things that you could be doing if you wanted to pursue this type of strategy for this site. There's a lot that you could be doing next. So first of all, completing the cost estimates and the engineering studies for for the environmental and the other infrastructure needs. That's pretty important. um, you know, you can do, again, the pre-development planning. If you want to maintain some eligibility for the federal grants, you can start to do the NEPA checklist, the cost benefit analysis, planning level studies for open space. You can start to apply for those federal grants, figure out who the applicant is, probably the city, but maybe the city and the state could go and jointly, apply for some of these funding programs. A financial analysis like Matt's or like Mike said, like what is the real cost benefit? Or, what is the potential revenue that's going to be generated from these developments in the future? We don't have that information either. So that's a study in and of itself, really an economic analysis of what the proposed development would entail in terms of, long-term revenue. And then, starting to reach out to the developers. You have some good examples of, sites where it has been master planned. Have you talked to those developers? Have you, bring them to the site, see what their interest is, or, get some feedback from them. So those are things that you can start doing right away. And then Dale, you can go to the next slide. Maybe we'll come back to this, Dale, at the end. But there's some specific things again, if you'd like to undertake this, type of approach, there's some real micro steps that you can start to do. First of all, we're talking about maybe having you guys put together a steering committee. I don't know if you have a formal steering committee, and having some kind of a project management structure, because if you're really going to start to attack this like a pre-development, like development, you really want to have more of an action oriented plan to make sure that everybody's doing what they're saying they're going to be doing. A 5-year funding strategy, understanding among the public entities who's doing what, start to apply for and secure grants, really figure out how you want to approach the site, putting out the developer agreements, and, again, starting to do that developer outreach. So those are all, things that you can do. So, we'd like to get some feedback from you if you're kind of on board with this strategy, or if this is what you've been thinking about anyways. It would be good to hear your feedback. But that's the approach essentially. So Dale,
we have a lot of this going on through our engineer, and we're working. So this falls right in line with everything that we've been doing. It's good to see it in, this action plan setup, but do know that this falls, directly in line with what it is that we have plans, and know that it's not a 18 to 24 month plan.
Right. It can take some time, but that's good. But maybe you can formalize some of the additional, players, the state players that can really assist you working through those pre-development issues.
Right.
Would be a good addition. Expanding what you're already doing, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Okay. So go ahead, Dale. That was a lot of information.
Take
so
a drink of water, Julia. Does
Thank
anybody
you.
else, before I go on to the funding options and some thoughts about that, does anybody else have any comments or questions with what's been presented so far? Okay, we're all set. No, only kidding. Well, just please interrupt anytime as we go along. So I'm going to talk about funding options. I think from the previous slide, we talked about a 5-year funding strategy. Besides the common sense about doing that, there's a certain sequencing on a lot of these grant programs where you have to do certain planning activities before you're even eligible for the construction or even the design of it. And I'll go through some of that in the next bunch of slides. A lot of the funding sources that I'm going to talk about, it was funny because I wanted to get A through Z. I got A through Y. I was looking for the Z, but every day new funding sources are being announced at the federal level. There's certainly a lot of things going on in Louisiana. And then there's, of course, private development options. But there are many things in these funding options that relate to the planning activities that Juliet was talking about, in the design parts of it and in the construction parts of it. A lot of the grant funding sources also get into the capacity building piece of it, which is part of planning, to build partnerships, which is strongly encouraged as part of the eligibility for some of these programs. And a lot of these programs that I will talk about are also, the wrong way, are also applicable to the private sector. They would incorporate the conversation with the private sector. So the first slide is really about capacity building and the planning activities. These are some of the grant program. I'm not going to go through every single one, but basically some of these are ongoing, like A is an ongoing process. When you apply to FEMA for the other two programs for the infrastructure, the BRIC program, that could be site work eventually, that could be drainage, that could be your open space, certainly the flood mitigation program through FEMA are a lot of those infrastructure type costs. But you have to go in first with a planning process with FEMA for B and C, for example. And that process starts in September, and usually they make their decisions in January. So your 5-year funding strategy would have sort of a calendar of when you would apply for these things. So you have to, with B and C, with FEMA, for example, you have to make sure your state hazard mitigation plan incorporates the site and some of the ideas that you have. And they pay for you to do that through applying for planning funds first. And then in the future slide, you'll see that you can apply for then the actual engineering part and the construction of the related infrastructure. So you may think of flood mitigation in terms of things related to water, but it also means access roads and other things that are going to be affecting those things. And if you had buildings that were in the flood zone, I don't know that you do, but you can do foundation waterproofing, things like that to buildings that you want to keep. So we'd have to take a look at the site in more detail. D is again another capacity building. A lot of programs like D will actually provide other funding sources. You get a grant to then study what the funding sources are through the US DOT. So again, ultimately, it may not be construction, but this is more in the planning side of things. The next whole bunch of slides are really get into what you can apply for. In A, you'll be doing the actual design and the actual construction, on-site, off-site transportation systems. Again, you have a lot of roads there. Whether the roads stay exactly the way they are based on if you followed sort of the model of ICF or if you had a master developer with their own program, but really you want to take a look at what the current infrastructure is and apply through a program like A. B and C, of course, you're familiar with because you're dealing with Rebecca. And a lot of these funding sources do require a match. B and C require a 20% match that does not have to be cash. It could be in kind or other related contributions, but there is a match requirement for these. The two D and E FEMA, these are the construction side of the roadway and all of it related to resiliency and flood management. Even though you don't have a flooding issue, you are in a floodplain. So there's going to be questions if you want their money. You're going to have to answer the questions about, what your resiliency plan is, for example. And Juliet covered some of these things. There's a 25% match. It could also be cash or not cash, but they wanted to see the investment. Community development block grant is interesting. CDBG, I don't know if you have county funds for CDBG or you get your own entitlement funds. You probably don't get entitlement, but probably at the county level you do. This could be used in a couple of different ways. It could be for, a community facility, which is like a road system. Again, you may end up doing some sort of community use on this site as you think about what you're going to use the program for, the site for. So CDBG could be eligible for building a community center, hypothetically, on the site if you wanted to do that, or something that for the public, for the community folks. Usually funding for this is actually, as we speak, whoever doles out your CDBG funds is probably taking applications right now. This is usually a springtime thing, and they have to submit by May 15th to HUD. And so if you're probably looking at the spring of 24 to apply for community development block grant, and I would strongly encourage you to do that. Also, some of the environmental issues, some of the demolition under blight removal could be done under CDBG. That's a very, that's something that they really encouraged, blight removal, and it's something that's, I think, underutilized. I've been working on CDBG for almost 40 years, 4-0. So I've used it quite a bit for interesting things related to blight removal and what's referred to environmental justice these days. In terms of other DOT, again, a lot of this is road and transportation related. Some of these, again, depending on what you envision for use of the property, whether it's the ICF vision or some other vision. Again, if you have industry on the site and there's trucking and shipping and things related to it, you could come up with some of these DOT programs. Your congressional earmarks, of course, is the most flexible thing. You know how to do this better than we do, and you can definitely raise some money. Earmarks are back in, as far as we know, and that's something that you can keep it flexible. Looking at a 5-year plan, you want to see what your limitations are on some things and use your congressional earmarks for meeting those gaps. For I, a lot of this is related to utilities and renewable energy. We're going to talk a little bit about energy in quite a few slides. There are many programs through the Department of Energy. We're not talking about creating solar fields, but there are other interesting ways to build resilience on the site, and where you can therefore build rooftop solar, for example. And I and some of the other ones will help you take a look at the utility development on the site as it relates to renewable energy. And I will also say that there's going to be a really big comprehensive report as an exhibit to our overall final report, which was done by Ryan on our team. It has a ton of stuff in it. We're only going to touch the surface today, but there's lots and lots of programs. We know that you work with CLECO. They're an important partner of yours. This is sort of as a supplement to help the park work in cases of environmental challenges or environmental events. These conservation programs, of course, it's all related to flood hazards, open space development. You're going to have a lot of open space costs, whether you think so or not. There's going to be lots of development. And if you have trail system, I think that's something you have it's an incredible opportunity that you have. And these programs will help fund some of the public access aspects of the development. Department of Commerce, EDA. Well, again, if you're going to build a business incubator on site or do something that's related to an industry cluster, in the ICF report, they talk about retail and other kinds of commercial uses, but EDA is something you can use. They require a 50% hard match, cash match for EDA, but they will build your infrastructure. And I don't know how many grants a year go to Louisiana, but EDA, I've done one small and one really complicated EDA projects in my previous life, but this is a real possibility. You just have to have your act together funding wise with the match. So if you're going to do let's say you're doing a targeted development on site with a smaller developer versus a master developer, and they're going to do a small office park or something like that, this is something you could take a look at through EDA. There is a 50% match though. Department of Labor is something that's going to be related to incentivizing private investment on some of these sites, especially if it's cluster based, whether it's agricultural part of your economy or manufacturing or anything related to that. It also applies to commercial and retail. There are lots of grants to incentivize through, again, it's all part of how you pull this together to build your infrastructure and bring in the private sector. I'm only on M, so I'm trying not to kill you with too many details about each one, but again, they'll all be in the final report. This act is on M is for capacity building and helping you get as a gateway to finding other funding opportunities. This is really something to engage the engineering community and the community at large. You can get lots of technical assistant money and do some preliminary design work with this. Historic tax credits, I think Tim and Juliet mentioned this before. Between the federal historic tax credits and other state tax credit programs, those buildings that Tim was mentioning before could receive 45% of the development cost related to historic tax credits. So that's very significant if you're talking about 4 or 5 buildings. And again, some of these programs, you have to own the site. In some of these programs, you have to have some partnership with the state. It's all going to vary, and it's all should be developed as part of your 5-year plan. I'm big into the 5-year planning activities because I think you have to, when you have so many cash flow possibilities here, you have to be organized. Private activity bonds is like tax exempt bonding at low interest rates. Again, a lot of these programs are 30-year bonds or 40-year loans. Again, they're tax exempt bonds, so investors buy those like they snap them up at 3 or 4% or whatever they're going to happen to be in the marketplace. This will build a significant potentially part of your the nut that you have to cover in the industrial park in this park development on just on the basic roads and utilities. That budget that we had before, believe it or not, was higher than $68 million. It was higher, but we're playing around with it. But again, some of the costs are probably on the high side. Some of them are on the low side. Utilities might be on the low side. But again, you have to obviously have the plan. Your own state has some programs under the Housing and Community Development Act of 74, which is where the CDBG program originally came. This is a separate program. It's like an economic development spinoff of HUD funds. Again, that can be used for roads, utilities. It could be related to a direct project for business related, under economic development. The restoration tax credit is a tax abatement for developers. Again, this is to incentivize and to promote this through a 5-year plan and how you're doing this to engage the private sector in that process as a partner. I know you've been doing that, and so that's a good thing. This Competes program is, again, more for private investment. It's the public-private partnership type program. This is very cluster-based, sector-based, related to agribusiness, waste management, entertainment, all of these things I heard and read about in what you've been already doing and things that are part of your local economy. So this program, again, is a collaboration. And I mentioned in the beginning comments that we'd be talking a lot about collaboration and partnerships today. We're almost at why. Okay, the Clean Water program, again, these are bond programs. They're usually 40-year bonds, and this is all about your utilities, your water, your sewer, stormwater management. Again, you have to put them all together in the alphabet soup and figure out what's the best fit in the right sequence of when to apply for. Same thing with T. That is also related to utilities, and U is all about the private sector and incentivizing them. And this is a great opportunity, depending on the the cluster, the sector that you're dealing with, creating funding for helping them build out their project or in a partnership with them. This fund is, again, there's a lot about resiliency. That's the big buzzword among federal agencies these days, keeping the site resilient in managing the utilities, but in terms of the environment and storms and things. This particular program is particular to your region and in Louisiana in general. Again, for road infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, flood control. This is a lot. Again, when you do flood control or stormwater management, you're building infrastructure to do that. And that picks off some of the costs of the 68 million in terms of the roads and things like that. Again, this is another part of EDA. They have different grants. They have the Public Works program, and they have this economic adjustment program. They have very similar requirements, 50% matches. Environmental justice is basically all about getting rid of contamination on a site, in a community where the income levels are a certain level. Actually, they're taking applications right now for this until the end of April of this year. So again, you're looking more likely at April of 24. Most of these programs will continue into 24 beyond the presidential election, who knows. But basically, you still have a couple of years to get into these programs. This is another one that is all about capacity building and is a gateway to other funding sources, not just their funding source. And then, of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the private sector. They're certainly going to they should be part of your 5-year strategy. And we're going to have Lee talk about that as a private sector person in a couple of minutes. But basically, we have to get them involved because they're the ones that are a very important partner, and they might share in some of the costs depending on how you go about your either master developer or multiple developer strategy. I'll just briefly mention Energy Grid. Ryan did a very comprehensive report that's going to be part of it. Like all of these links, I started looking through them all. This is not my area of expertise, but it's a part of the puzzle that needs to be thought about. CLECO is your energy provider. And this is all about the resiliency of the site in the case of the power going down. And it creates different tools so that you don't have to build a solar field. If you have a good energy grid, you can do rooftop solar on a lot of the buildings that, let's say you did do the ICF approach or some version of that. These microgrids are really important, and a lot of these programs, could be explored for different parts of the site. You have 400 acres, or 200 developable acres. And you have a great opportunity. We didn't add this to the budget because, you know, you're creating costs that has to have an offset. But this is something to take a look at in partnership with CLECO and other private sector partners. And this is a growing area of funding that should be explored. And certainly EV charging stations, may not be a lot of them today, but in 10 years, they're going to be everywhere. So this is something to explore now to build it into the infrastructure improvement. So with that being said about the funding, you know, there's always new programs. I guess Energy Grid was Z. I wanted to get to Z just to make it nice, neat alphabet. With all of this being done, the pre-development costs that Juliet and the pre-development process that Juliet covered before leads us to the private sector. And Lee just joined our team, but I think it's important to hear from somebody who's been part of private developments, not terribly different than what ICF talked about. So I'm going to give the slide over to Lee for a minute and kind of talk about his view from the private sector.
Okay, Dale, I appreciate that. And while you were talking, I came up with another Z. So we now have two Zs. And that's just to, if you will, make a note, but philanthropic program related investments. And, you know, there are a lot of folks, the Walmart Foundation, a couple of Coca-Cola foundations here in Chattanooga and others have made significant investments into community redevelopment programs that this might be a good fit for, but that's just, if you will, make that note.
Sure.
If you will, go on to the next slide.
Here you are. It's your slide.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Well, in looking at what the ICF plan envisions, you know, I just use a little bit of slightly different terminology. And to me, it's a mixed use master plan community. You've got several examples there in Louisiana that are that are similar to this. One is the River Ranch development. Another is a development in the Slidell area called the Fremont Town Center. These are both projects that were developed primarily by private developers, but with community involvement and fiscal involvement from the city or the county or the parish metropolities. But from a developer's perspective, these kind of communities are typically developed over some extensive period of time and benefit from strong centralized leadership. And the centralized leadership is what, you know, kind of keeps the project on track and keeps everything working together. The leadership guides the continuous planning, designing, and engineering processes while coordinating with municipal planning, zoning, and economic development entities and the public in general, and engages other private sector developers along the way. Now that leadership could either be, you know, government leadership, or it could be private sector leadership. Coming out of the private sector development business, I tend to lean one direction, but that doesn't make it exclusively the only way to do it. But that working together group builds the necessary infrastructure utilizing private capital and public resources on an orderly and balanced basis. And anytime you're using the public resources, there's got to be some payback to the government entities that are making those investments. And that's where I think the economic analysis and the cost benefits ratio studies need to be, you know, need to be part of the plan that's already been mentioned. Those requirements, you know, must be balanced with the reality of market economics and the availability of government investment in the form of grants and infrastructure, combined with private investment and commercial finance. Going back to our comment about, using a lot of private capital. The coordination of the infrastructure development must be coordinated to ensure that the end result is a serviceable overall community, and that it also is serviceable throughout the development process. You need to, somehow or another, the project needs to keep things balanced as it goes along, because nothing would be worse than to build a shopping center and then to tear up the road in front of it to build a new road and put the shopping center out of business for 6 months while infrastructure is being developed. So things have to be balanced and timed as it goes along. On the slide, we've listed a couple of examples there in Louisiana that I'm familiar with. Both of these, to my perspective, are very highly successful. There's another one in Ashburn, Virginia, which was substantially larger, some 1,000 acres or so, that I was personally involved in. And that one, a number of years ago, required changing a state law to allow the development of a private toll road leading to Dulles Airport that was developed by the private developers under an agreement, under a public-private partnership agreement with the state and the counties. And the same thing with the utilities infrastructure that went in there. So these things, you know, they've been done before. They're good models of them. That's something that you can look at and say, well, we like this about this one. We don't like that about the other, but there are some good examples out there to look to. So Dale, with that observation, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Lee. Before we're going to stop presenting a minute and talk about things. You know, our scope is coming to an end. Today's 27th. My granddaughter's 14th birthday, but that's another story. And we will have our final report in draft form by the end of this week. And it will go through a process, but certainly Doug and people in the community, everybody will get a look at it and be able to comment. And, you know, we will wrap up our work by, I think, the 13th or 14th of March. But everybody will see the report in the sequence that, you know, where we have to provide it. The report will have all the details of everything we did, and we'll also have lots of attachments, including both webinars and Ryan's work. So let me just stop presenting that. Okay. So, you know, the foundation of the work that we've done is really based around brownfields. I mean, you have a lot of buildings. We don't know exactly which ones will stay. From our interview, Tim and I work with the facility manager for the hospital. The majority of them would probably be demo. We don't know if the majority is 100 or 80. You know, that's to be determined. Some are little buildings, some are bigger buildings. Most of them have lead in them, and many of them have asbestos. You have ASTs. There's a couple of above ground storage tanks, not that many of those, but you definitely have them. And so I think addressing these issues as part of a planning process, like you were talking about, Doug, before, is important to bring the private sector in, get rid of those things that would be financially not doable for a private developer. But the main point of today for us, and then I'm going to stop talking, is really about a process to engage in and more planning to do so that you're ready for the private sector to come in, because they want to make a profit. They're not philanthropists. They're philanthropists, but they're primarily there to make a profit. So with that, comments? That's a lot of information.
It is a lot. I'm grateful to you guys and the work that you all put in, because the one thing that we'll take out of there, besides some great ideas, is certainly a great roadmap to success with it. And the years of experience that you guys have all put into this is certainly going to leave a mark on our community and our state from here on out. And excited to get going with it. I think going through A through Z2 is going to be something.
It will, but it can be done. I've worked on many projects that have 6, 7 sources of funding. It just has to be, you know, and sometimes you have to temporarily borrow because some will reimburse, some will pay invoices. It just depends on the funding sources. Rebecca.
So Dale, is your list A through Z, is that prioritized on like which ones you think are most likely, or is there, and you know, it's a lot to have them look at every one of them. So if there's a way that maybe we could say, here are the 5 or 6 you should start with, or one of the things we did at SWAMO is start doing 1-pagers on funding sources and technical assistance things that just kind of gives the nitty gritty, like what it is, how much money you can apply for, what are key funding dates, you know, stuff like that to help Doug kind of sort through the funding sources.
You know, I would say about that, with regard to the first one, we could certainly add this to the final report, you know, 5 or 6 places to start. The 1-pagers are an excellent task for another scope, I think, because that really gets into putting it in a calendar that becomes part of whether you want to call it a 3-year or a 5-year plan. You know, if you look at FEMA, you're always talking about at least a 3-year plan because you have to get into the planning. And to get into the planning, it has to be in the hazard mitigation plan. To get into the hazard mitigation plan, there has to be a process. It's all a process, but I think the one pagers is an excellent idea for, half of those funding sources.
Yeah,
But it's certainly prioritize.
Yeah, Rebecca, one of the things we've done on other projects, and we just, we came into this really late and don't have all the pieces together, but you develop a sources and uses chart. So, the pieces are here, right? So a lot of the costs, et cetera, the A through Z are the sources. But then what you do is you put that together based on time. So Dale just finished one for a project up in Maine. It still needs more work, but we got somewhere down that road. But that could be in a sort of next step task that somebody could take on based on what these guys have presented.
Yeah, because you're not going to be able to target every grant, but if you like this approach or this makes sense to you, then to have that 5-year window of, okay, here's what you can reasonably go for, and how would you get that 68 million down to 20 or 10, and so you're targeting, you're matching grant opportunities or funding opportunities with funding needs. And then you also have to determine who the applicant is. Is it the state? Is it the city? Is it an economic development agency outside of the city and state? So I think that's what we envisioned. If you're interested, is that we could take that on as another task, to help you, kind of further refine that roadmap, I guess. And we've done it. We did it for a project in Maine. We did it for a project in Providence, where we came up with about, what was the total budget there? About $9 million worth of actionable grants, in addition to some private investment. So that was the outcome of that. This one is a little bit bigger, but certainly there's some low hanging fruit there, Rebecca, I think, with this infrastructure bill and the EPA.
Hey,
Yeah.
Juliet,
Mhm.
Maine is 70 million, so
70, yeah. So
it's all in the
Well,
neighborhood.
there are similarities, although the
Mhm.
climate is certainly different, get some
Mhm.
asphalt versus concrete, right there is probably a big thing. But Rebecca, you're the low hanging fruit. I mean, all the cleanup, the
Oh yeah, we got that taken. I'm not worried about that at all. So,
Yeah.
but
The
that is
other
the
stuff.
important thing.
well, let me ask you this, because I'm trying to figure out how best to help the city move forward. And I think what we regularly heard from the state was they really want to see what's the plan for making sure that all of the lots have access to infrastructure.
Mhm.
So I think what I heard from you, Dale, before was that we really need to have a comprehensive infrastructure survey done and maybe some maps developed with what the existing conditions are and some recommendations.
Yeah.
So we still have a good bit of money for brownfield planning activities, and doing that kind of infrastructure survey is one of the options. So if we tasked one of our consultants to do that for the city, we can probably do the survey part of it to tell you what the existing conditions are. Because right, Doug, you don't have that already.
Not yet.
Okay.
We don't. It's just taking all of this in. We're doing a lot of work with Tom, as he's known that area from Pan American, has known that area for years and years and years. So I think putting something together with you guys, if there is something additional, would be so beneficial, because that seems to be what pops up at every topic.
Yep. So I think if we do that and have our consultant work with Tom on that, and then
Right.
maybe have Tom make some recommendations from an engineering standpoint that's a little more concrete.
I think one of the things that's going to benefit us is because that the property lies within our downtown development district that is state legislated, And just recently we have, there's small grants that we've gotten, but the downtown development district and the city both have gotten for our area over here. And so if we routinely get the CDBG money for the city, but if there's an opportunity to apply for some from the downtown development district for that area, then maybe we can combine and just, that'd be proof of getting out of the box and doing something.
And I think progress is always showing progress to other funding sources, and let's say year 2 or 3 is critical because with EDA, which can be wonderful and a nightmare to deal with at the same time. Federal EDA. Anybody who's dealt with them will snicker at that one. But on the other hand, they want to see a complete plan. They want to see progress, and they want to see how you're going to get to the end and produce the 25 jobs or whatever it's going to be that you're using as the outcome.
Well, and for the EPA folks, so we're still learning about the land revitalization technical assistance. So if our consultant did do the more comprehensive survey and we came up with a good estimate for the cost, or a better estimate for the cost, how does that timeline work with requesting the EPA? Because I feel like we probably have to submit another request then to have Dale and his group kind of continue this effort. Is that correct? Or is it another regionally directed technical assistance? And because I think we're in the timeline where y'all are collecting projects for that.
It's a Mike or Juliet question. Answer.
No, EPA's on the phone. They should really talk to that. I mean, I certainly can, but if EPA wants to jump in, they should.
I'm not sure. Carol was having some audio issues, and Emily's on the phone from EPA, but I think for this technical assistance, we can.
Yeah, Juliet, I'll speak and EPA can correct me. So I understand that Tetra Tech, whom we've done this work through, just received their extension. We should receive an extension soon. There is money in that regional directed TA. And we are also on the GADIT schedule, which is a headquarters contract for, GDIT's kind of been a mix of reuse planning and finance, whereas Tetra Tech has been more on the finance, costing, et cetera side. But both of those, we believe, do have funding. We are on both of those, and it looks like the extensions are coming through. The issue is that they're only through, I think it's the middle of September. So, something would have to get going May-ish in order to probably make some difference for folks.
But I think the things that we did in Maine, for example, just one example with John, our sort of in-house civil guy, would be really helpful to start nailing down some of these numbers.
Yeah, or working side by side with whomever Rebecca, brings in. It's just a matter of, Rebecca, can you get them, teed up in a time frame that would make sense? But I think what might be most helpful, based on everything I've heard, is this, this sort of 5-year plan with the sources and uses, and what do you do first? And that, Doug, that probably means we got to come send some people down there to meet with you. I hope that's okay.
Come on.
We'll send Lee and Tim, or we'll send the folks that are closest. But I think sitting around the table and kind of thinking through all that may be something that would be most helpful.
It certainly will. And just, we drive around the property a lot. Just, I don't know, that may seem a little weird, but kind of soak it in a little bit. And you'd be surprised at the ideas that pop up just from driving, when it's scheduled, of course. Don't want to think that we're driving on there when we're not supposed to, but yeah, no, it's a great area.
So I'm not specifically from headquarters, as you all know. And like Michael said, there is a 6 months extension, but there is some restrictions behind it, specifically related to funding. So Rebecca, I think there might be a need to come back after the contract ends come September for us to revisit if you need any more technical assistance from land revitalization, just because the financial constraints on what is allowed within these next 6 months of this extension. So I would say, wait for the final to come through and kind of start making those assessments on what direction y'all really want to move forward in, particularly in the next 6 months. And then when the new contract comes in, we can look at possibly getting you more technical assistance, but I don't, and I can't specifically say if it is possible right now, just because of the money that's left on the table isn't a large amount.
Well, what's not a large amount?
Each region was allotted whatever money was left from this budget. And each region only roughly got maybe 50K. And right now that money is being potentially sourced out somewhere else.
Okay.
Well, there's going to be a lot of
And
conversation.
so what I would say then, is talk to Ann. There is the GDIT contract as well. Again, I don't know the ins and outs of all that. Of course, Emily knows better what headquarters is saying. We just kind of hear drips and drabs, but that may be another possibility for now. But if you want to wait, there will be new contracts. We don't know how those are going to work out, but the intention, I think the infrastructure bill funds land revitalization at similar levels for 5 years. So this is year 1, so there'd be 4 more years of funding.
By the way, Teams doesn't cut us off at 12:30, does it?
No, we should be fine. But I think Rebecca and the others, if there is funding available through this existing contract, we would be happy to put together another task that would address, a specific, timeline and approach and prioritization for these funding programs that you can really work with. If there's not funding, then we can look at the fall. But under any circumstance, if you have funding in your brownfield grant, your multi-purpose grant, we would recommend that you continue to pursue the cost estimates, the engineering cost estimates for your infrastructure needs, the capacity analysis, and that would be outside of our scope anyways. That really should be done by an engineering firm. But I would think that that could be an activity covered under your brownfield grant. That you could continue if you have money left. I mean, because that's all in the cost assessment of what is it going to cost to get rid of the buildings and clean up the sites and, remove infrastructure that's unneeded or improve infrastructure that may be necessary. So, if that's helps to be clear about what we could do.
All right, we just lost Mike, and it's getting to be lunchtime.
Yes.
So, so if there's nothing else. There's a lot more conversations that are going to go on. Doug, we really like working on this project. It's so interesting. It's got so many different variables, Obviously for the planning geeks here, you know, we love how this, you know, how many things have to be done. But the site itself, like geographically and ecologically, is a really interesting site as well. And then you have things you can, really tangible things you can do, taking down buildings that are contaminated, taking out, you know, tanks, all stuff that, besides the environmental issue, is good for economic development. So, you know, we're excited. You know, we're really enjoyed working on the project so far.
Well, great. We're thrilled to have you guys, and you know that 11-acre area closed or is in the process of it, and so there are 5 of those old barracks buildings that'll begin coming down in March, which is just going to spur. You know, it just shows activity when those things start coming down, and people will get a sense of it. You know, it's just things get tried out in the court of public opinion, and you know, it's why are you putting that up, and how come it's not a swimming pool or a big arena? And you know, we'll do anything that people want to come and buy and do. You know, it's they don't understand the city's not doing any of this. You know, we're facilitating and helping and working on these things, but you know, it's not ours to run through the years. But it's going to be great to look back on this, you know, 10, 20 years from now and see what it all turned into.
At least you didn't say 2 or 3 years from now.
No, I know better than that.
All right, so if there's nothing else, if Vita Nova team could stay on the call for a second. Thank you, everybody, for we're right at the hour-and-a-half mark right now, and it was great, and we look forward to hopefully working with you again.
Sounds good. Thank y'all.
Great, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
Thank
Nice
you.
to meet you, Doug.
Everyone.
All right, stop recording.